Under the Paris Agreement, countries agreed to limit the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees. In the US, emissions have begun to trend down, as have emissions from the European Union. In China, where more than half of the country's total energy consumption is powered by coal, emissions have increased dramatically.
China added 30 gigawatts of coal last year. That's about 15 very large coal-fired power stations. We need to help our customer countries, whether it's Japan or Korea or in Southeast Asia or China, to bring down their emissions by using technologies that allow them to strengthen their economy.
The question for Australia is, will you now please join in with the rest of the world to manage this enormous problem? Australia's recent history has, frankly, been very poor on this issue.
What new emissions targets will the Australian government be taking to the Biden Leaders Summit this week?
Well, look, Andy, we constantly update our projections on our outcomes versus our targets. 2030, of course, is the target now. Those targets are a floor on our ambitions, not a cap. We'll meet and beat them.
It's a great privilege to be here with all of you tonight. Angus Taylor's here tonight, and I want to commend Angus for the great job he's been doing on energy and emissions reduction. We're not going to achieve net zero in the cafes, dinner parties and wine bars of our inner cities.
The government hasn't locked in a net zero by 2050 target. The government hasn't revisited its short-term target and looked at how it can increase its emission reductions by 2030. The government has just followed the same old path, announcing money for technologies that include support for the fossil fuel industry.
We take our emissions reduction targets very seriously.
Our diplomats will challenge the practices of countries whose action or inaction is setting the world back. When countries continue to rely on coal for a significant amount of their energy, or invest in new coal factories, or allow for massive deforestation, they will hear from the United States.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Is the US making this somewhat veiled threat about calling countries concerning to you?
The US and Australia and other countries around the world all want to see emissions coming down. This is not about declaring war on industries. Our outcomes are strong. They're better than comparable countries, including the United States. People make a lot of promises. The difference with Australia is we deliver.
Do you doubt the US commitment?
We always have. No, I'm just saying that we always deliver. I'm talking about Australia's performance. We're 19% down as of this year. Better than Japan, better than Korea, better than New Zealand, better than Canada. Our performance has been strong.
We had a very significant emission reduction period from about 2007 to 2013 as a result of land clearing legislation and the price on carbon introduced by the previous government. Since then, we've had a very slight reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and in fact, in terms of fossil fuel emissions, we've actually kept on going up until we hit COVID.
The criticism being made of your government is that it lacks leadership and commitment over climate change goals. How do you respond to those critics?
We have the commitment and we're delivering. What matters at the end of the day is outcomes. What matters at the end of the day is delivery, and we are delivering. We'll continue to deliver. Our goals are strong. We do want to get to net zero. We do want to get there as quickly as possible.
What we have in terms of a target is not consistent with that Paris Agreement goal that we have. And one of those elements is how much emissions we should be reducing to stay aligned with the Paris Agreement goals of 1.5 degrees if possible, or 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees. And that really does mean we need to have something like emission reductions of 40 to 45% by 2030.
There is a sense that the government will have to move and renew the emissions targets sometime this year. Are you ruling that out before Glasgow, or ruling that out before the next election?
Well, I've always said, and I said it a moment ago, that we always update our emissions projections year on year. Well, Australia provides one of the most transparent carbon accounting and projection regimes in the world. Each year we update those projections. We'll do that this year as we have in the past. They have improved every year since we've been in government. I'm confident that will continue.
The Prime Minister has hinted recently about committing to a mid-century net zero target. What's to lose if the government could just make that announcement? Why can't you just make that announcement? Everybody else is.
Well, our goal is to get to net zero. That's part of the Paris Agreement. We want to do it as soon as possible, preferably before 2050. We've been unambiguous about that. The real challenge for the world on this is how to do it. Every year since we've been doing this, since we came into government, we've improved our position versus both our 2020 and 2030 targets. That will continue to be the case.
The US has announced it will cut their emissions by 50% by 2030, requiring us to double our targets to keep pace, according to the Australia Institute. So if you're the Minister for Emissions Reductions, why aren't you doing the same?
Well, we'll continue to improve our position year on year, as we always have, Andy. And the thing about Australia is we've always delivered. It's outcomes that matter here.
The COP26 climate conference in Glasgow later this year will be D-Day for nations to find a path to keep global temperatures below dangerous levels.
That's really going to set the stage for everyone else, and it's going to be the commitments on the part of the world's two largest historical emitters of carbon now, the United States and China. It's going to be their commitments that are going to force other intransigent actors, other petrostates, to come to the table with meaningful commitments themselves. And I think Australia is foremost among them.
We'll be releasing our long-term strategy ahead of COP26 later this year. It's crucial we continue to stay focused. It's crucial that we continue to maintain our resolve and in ways that don't tell consumers what kind of vehicles they've got to drive or houses they've got to live in. It's got to respect Australians' roles in businesses and households, but at the same time deploy those technologies in ways that strengthen our economy and bring down emissions at the same time.
We really need to ratchet up those commitments that start to align us with the goal of limiting warming below truly dangerous levels.
Bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.